So in my first student teaching rotation at Central Institute for the Deaf, one of my goals was to plan and teach 1 week of structured language lessons to my two groups of kids, which I definitely accomplished. I think it was more challenging than I expected it to be from what I can remember, but I think I had a lot of support in doing that, and I think it was a little bit easier for me to do structured language lessons as opposed to like conversational lessons because they didn't involve as much creativity. It was a little more straightforward as to what you were going to do. Another one of my goals was to improve taking language samples, and to be completely honest, I don't feel like I addressed this goal too much throughout my time at CID just because of just the limited amount of time that we had together, and I think being overwhelmed by like other work that was going on, I didn't take as many opportunities to try taking language samples. But now in my fourth student teaching rotation, I feel like I have more experience talking about language samples, and because we're taking constant notes on children's spontaneous language, I have more opportunities to improve how I jot those notes down and how I go back and analyze them. So I think that's been good to address that at this point in my student teaching process. My third goal for my first rotation was to also improve in identifying and addressing speech errors, which I don't think I did in my first rotation. I think I'm still trying to address that now. A year later, it definitely takes some fine-tuning your attention and what you're paying attention to in speech to really pick up on the errors that the kids make. And I think the more lessons that I've wrote out longhand and really analyzed how to produce each speech sound has kind of drawn my attention more towards how to implement better techniques to improve and correct speech, and has kind of tuned my ear to hearing those errors from the kids. So that was my first rotation. In my second rotation out in Lindbergh with my itinerant teacher, my first goal was to increase just my overall knowledge of the IEP, itself and the process, and I do feel like I was able to talk through that a lot with my cooperating teacher. I had a few opportunities to sit in on team meetings. I don't think I ever went to a formal IEP meeting, but I do think I got some decent hands-on experience, because another one of my goals was to write like specific individualized IEP goals, not to actually put into the form itself, but just for my own practice. And I was really grateful that my teacher gave me an opportunity to do this quite often. She would give me like a child to focus on and say, for like one particular week, I would write a goal that was based on syntax for that child. So I do feel like I got some good experience with that. And then my third goal in my second teaching rotation was to plan and implement lessons based on IEP goals. And I did have opportunities to do this, though they were a little bit limited. Some of my kids I didn't have. Being in the itinerant position, you had limited time with all of your students, so I really only worked with 2 of the 5 or 6 that we saw, where I actually got to plan ahead and, collect the materials and put like an actual activity together for the students, which I was very appreciative for the opportunity. So that was nice, and it was kind of interesting to work off of that IEP form and kind of figure out the language of what they're saying, what I actually need to do, how I need to judge the child's progress, and that sort of thing. In my third teaching rotation at Clark in Massachusetts, my first goal was to just increase my consistency and variety in managing behavior, and since I was with such little kids, I feel like it was all I did the entire time. It was a lot of behavior management, but it was a positive experience, definitely, because Clark was definitely a different environment than what I expected, and I got a lot of experience and advice from different professionals, OT and just paraprofessionals, parents, a lot of collaboration on how to address certain kids' particular behaviors, so that was awesome. Another one of my goals was to implement like a week of centers activities that for the entire toddler room that I was in. And I did do this. I think I did 2 weeks of this actually, and I thought it was pretty successful. It was a little bit more challenging than I thought it would be, just because we had such a range of kids, and then you're trying to implement so many activities, but you know that not every kid can do every activity, and you don't know what the language will be for one kid versus another one, and what they'll actually be able to achieve at that center. So that was kind of challenging, but interesting nonetheless, because it forced me to be creative in the different types of activities that I came up with. And then I also wanted to increase how much I was like expanding, correcting, and prompting students just spontaneous language and their utterances. And I definitely got a lot of hands-on practice doing this, because the setup and the schedule at Clark was so different. There was never any structured language time for me to actually directly expand and correct and prompt for language, so I was doing it in a lot of natural play, and that kind of forced me to be aware of how often I can kind of increase the kids' utterances and just get them talking more. And then finally, I've had 2 sets of goals at Moog. My first ones were for working in the family center, and that was to implement a full toddler lesson that addressed all the areas: auditory development, speech, syntax, and something else that I can't remember. But we did that, and I felt really successful. I felt like I had a ton of support in implementing that whole week's worth of lesson, and I felt like it was a pretty good success, like in my own eyes. So that was nice. Another one of my goals was to familiarize myself with the tassel, and I'm kind of addressing that more in the second half of my rotation now that I'm in with the preschoolers. That has definitely forced me to, really get to know the tassel, and I still feel like I don't have like a great handle on it. I'm definitely learning more every day and getting more comfortable with it, so I'm excited to become more comfortable with it in the future. And then my third goal when working in the family center was just to address behavior in a variety of ways, since I was working with such little kids before, and I had never been in a setting where the kids would be, sitting in that high chair right in front of you for however long, and just I felt like I had a lot of big successes in that. I came up with several different schedules for some kids, kind of made different activities, different toys, different like monster boxes for kids to put their cards in. I felt pretty good about that, and I liked addressing behavior, because when you're working with kids that are so little and have limited language, it's because you're addressing so many other things, and one of those was behavior. So now, in the second half of my rotation, I'm addressing just improving my consistency in correcting and listening for speech. So I've kind of carried over that first goal from my first rotation into this rotation, and it's definitely getting a little bit better. I'm glad that I have like my cooperating teacher to kind of chime in and for me to look over and say, did I hear that right, or am I hearing this wrong? Like, I definitely still need that affirmation that like, no, you heard it wrong, like you're right, correct it. So that's been good. Still working on managing classroom management, managing behavior. It's been hard just because being a student teacher and coming into someone else's environment and trying to like just hop on board with the behavior management tools that they have in place can be challenging, and the kids are like, who are you? This is weird. But I feel like it's been pretty good, just trying to like stay consistent with that. And then finally, one of my goals for this second half of the rotation was to improve like my ability to take data, and I have addressed this quite often just when I'm stepping in, well, now that I'm teaching full lessons, just taking the time, even if it doesn't feel like it's part of the natural flow of the lesson, to write down data. I know that sometimes it takes away from the flow, but I think in order for me to do it, I have to force myself to just kind of like pause, write that down. So yeah. So then it asked us to consider our overall progress and how our past goals will shape our future goals. I really do feel like I've made big strides in just my overall teaching ability based on like my confidence. I feel more confident now 10 times more confident than I did when I was in my first student teaching rotation. I think that speech goal is really going to keep carrying over into my first couple of years of teaching, when I'm really just trying to tune into how exactly a child is producing a speech sound and how I'm going to address that, and just being more consistent about that. And then I also think that classroom management is really going to be key for my first probably 5 years of teaching, when I'm really just not a parent. I need to kind of figure out a way to manage these kids in a way that's like appropriate and functional. So, and then finally, data collection I think is going to carry over into my future goals as well, just because there's so much data to be taken at Moog, especially with all the forms that they use. You really have to like be on top of the data that you take. And so I think those will definitely contribute to my future goals as a teacher. Thank you.